Hello everyone, welcome back. Doing another video entry series here on the Patreon and on YouTube here. So this is another iteration of Steel Song. I played this deck at the Search Games 2K this past Saturday. It was the only one I played in. I just wanted to get out, give another couple of things a try before Las Vegas, doing a bit of field testing, as it were, to see what people played, people liked, and how it went. Spoilers. I got second, lost in the finals, had a really fun game against, or match against the Emerald Amber kind of songs deck. They have a lot of discard to kind of make it a little bit hard for me to set up, a lot of my songs, and they have the sweeping removal spell of Under the Sea, which they try to pair with a Kita, which makes everything smaller, and then it's one-sided for the Under the Sea effect. So they got the better of me. We had an interesting three-game set, kind of missed a bit towards the end of the third game with three aerials, not missing completely on songs, but missing on finding a hole in the world, which is what I was kind of playing towards the entire time. But win some, you lose some. Happens. The other match I lost, I think one of the games was a 4 Ursula in the top 18 or so cards game in the first round, but they played well. Everything, happens. It's a variance game. There are times when you don't draw what you need, and they draw, a lot of really good cards, and that just is what it is. But I took this version. There are a couple changes, which we'll get to in a minute. I did beat and have to play against Ruby Sapphire 3 times. I 2-0'd it twice and 2-1'd it once. And it's getting me to think a little bit about how the matchup plays out now and what's really changed in that matchup to make it feel more winnable, or if it's just been high variance games where I'm getting fortunate in certain situations, but they didn't really feel like blowouts neither which way. They felt like long-ish games where I had a good amount of control most of the game, or the ability to keep a game plan going, or was never really out of gas, and kind of was able to kind of sculpt a game plan around what I knew they could do or potentially could do, whether it be cards like Sisu or Be Prepared. I think my opponents all had those, both Ice Blocks, Brawls, big small Sisus, Visions to find pieces, Tamatoas. They were playing pretty normalized list, I would say. And yeah, we played a lot of games, and a lot of it came down to Pete's being well timed, Prince Naveen putting a lot of pressure on my opponent. Tinkerbell came up 1 or 2 times, honestly. One of the new changes we'll talk about in a minute here. I actually killed 3 things with it. I didn't straight up kill 3 things, but it helped finish off 3 different things, which was kind of cool. But no, let's get into the key changes here from the previous variation, which we're going to start with number 1. And I know, somewhat hypocritical in some ways, obviously. Prince Naveen, there's 3 copies as to 4. I said last week that if you're not playing 4, you're wrong. And as noted, I lost in the finals. I didn't win the event. So, obviously I made a mistake and should be playing 4. No. It's a balancing act, really. This deck is full of a lot of kind of tight puzzle pieces that really need to be fit to the kind of most perfect degree of perfect to make work. And sometimes the numbers have to give certain places. And the only thing that kind of mathematically made sense to me and also theoretically made sense to me was cutting a copy of Prince Naveen. The card that we really wanted to include was Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, just being a really impressive body, of course. Everyone's been playing Tinkerbell, or in some variation had Tinkerbell in their decks since set 1 in different steel decks. But one of the big things for me was wanting more edge in a mirror match potential, and even against Ruby Amethyst, honestly. The combination of Tinkerbell plus Grab Your Swords does take out most cards in both Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst. Some of the ones that matter, some of them gives caution. That combination of cards has been powerful since set 1. Everyone really knows it. Everyone really hates it who plays against it, and sometimes it feels like a blowout. And piecing those together is kind of a big win. But for me, honestly, the bigger combination was Tinkerbell helped make the Storm Rage On a lot better. Just the extra point from 2 to 3 was a huge difference, and also the most important thing that I wanted to try and adjust for was, I guess, 2 things I'll get to in a second too. Along Came Zeus plus Tinkerbell takes out Robin Hood. So Robin Hood's one of the best cards in the mirror match, just being huge willpower base and hard to remove a lot of the times without either giving them a card or giving up on your own Robin Hood triggered effect where you gain 2 lords. So with trying to mitigate the loss of that and make better use of my own Robin Hoods, I wanted to include some way to deal 1 damage, really. And Tinkerbell was it. And Tinkerbell was very good for me most of the event. I played against, my matchups were green-purple in round 1, Then I played against an Amber Steel Mirror round 2. Round 3 I played against Green Steel. Then I played against another Mirror round 3 or 4. Then into Ruby Sapphire, and then Ruby Amethyst. And that was the duration of the Swiss. I had to play the last round. I had the pair down, but I won. So I was ending up being the first seed into the top 8, where I played against one of the same Ruby Sapphire decks that I beat. And then a Blurple deck in top 4, and then in the finals, the Emerald Amber deck. So that was my matchup spread. Really, if you want to kind of jot that down, hopefully I was clear enough in my descriptions. But yeah, it was a variety of things. Having only played against one Ruby Amethyst was a little bit abnormal. I don't think I've gone a large tournament without seeing at least 2 copies in a long time. But hey, we were there when it is what it is. And my game spread, I don't have it up on the edge here, but I think after 7 rounds, my game win percentage, if it was a challenge, would have been 5-2-0s, and I went 1-2 in one match that I lost, and 2-1 in one of the Ruby Sapphire matches. So those would both be a wash in that sense, meaning they would have been the split games, having gone to a game 3. So it would have been 5-0-2. So at that point, after 7 rounds, I could have, at a challenge, intentionally drawn the last 2 rounds to make the top cut at 47 points, match points, what it would have been. So it would have been a very good performance for a challenge, and I'm looking to replicate that in, as you can see to my left, your right, Las Vegas event in just a couple weeks here. So it was a good tournament. It went really well. I really liked the changes I made. Grab Your Sword was another card that I'd previously excluded, which I was both impressed with, but also could have done without in the event, I feel like. There were a couple times where it was very powerful in games where combining with Tinkerbell, I was able to clear an opposing Amber Steel Song's deck's board. I think around 2 or 4. One of those are the matchups I played against them. But it was okay there. I mean, it could have been a different card and probably been mildly as effective. But it worked out really well there. I even made use of it against some of the Ruby Sapphire decks, and yeah, it was pretty good against the Amber Amethyst or Amber Emerald deck in the finals too. I think I was knocking my deck for the second copy at one point, but no, those 2 cards kind of gave a bit of an edge in the mirror match in certain aspects of it, and also against the green purple deck in round 1. They were both very good, even though I did lose that match. A little bit of missing on Whole New Worlds again, kind of the story of my losses the weekend were games or matches I missed on Whole New World, which happens. It does, it's part of the game, and if those are the only games or matches I lose, I'm feeling pretty good. Talking back to the other cards that were removed, you'll kind of note here, I'm going to go through really quick. There was, as I mentioned, the Prince Naveen, which is the most controversial in my own mind. I still am going to try and find ways to make a 4th one happen. And I went as far as to remove a copy of the Storm Majon to attempt to add the 2 Grab Your Swords as well. So Storm and Naveen became the 2 Grab Your Swords functionally, with uninkable count maintaining the same. Storm has been fine. I've seen a lot of the Ruby Amethyst decks adapt copies of Olaf or Minnie Mouse to help combat Steel Song by maintaining a board presence, so it's a little bit worse there. It's not a vital card in matchups. It's a good card, and happy to have it in my hand when I can sing it, whether it be shooting my own character to use with Rapunzel, or just taking something out for essentially the 3 ink or the singer cost there, getting to cycle a card as well. The other ones that were removed were 1 copy of Piglet, 1 copy of Ursula, and 1 copy of Big Cinderella Stout-Hearted. So those kind of seem kind of random, and Piglet and Ursula serve very different functions. They are much better in different points of different games. They don't really seem like cards that should be 2-ofs in decks either. One thing to note with how this game's decks are being built is that Steel Song kind of gets to cheat on that a little bit. And the reason it does is because it's the most efficient and effective Whole New World deck. That card in and of itself, Whole New World, lets you play differently with how you can construct your deck, because you're much more likely to see certain copies of your cards, even if you only have 2 of them, or 1 of them sometimes even. It lets you kind of play a little bit looser with those numbers there. While they are very different functionally, they're both very important, and I'm not certain I would be able to fully remove either of them from this deck. If I had more time to test before the event, I don't think I would have come to a different conclusion thinking about it more. Circling back to another point I've made a lot in the past, people in this game have never really, from my experience, built their decks or intentionally practiced matchups, how they feel going first versus second. Not just, oh, I win more when I'm going first, but how do I make my deck better going second is a big part of this game and a big part of people's understanding of how to build decks. We don't see enough of that yet. I've seen many, many deck lists, and not a single one of them really have a contingency plan, a backup card or two, or a kind of game plan shift that alters too much going first or second. Sure, sometimes the board will kind of dictate that, or your inkable count will as well, but cards like specifically Ursula, Vanessa, are a lot better when going second. Not to say you won't play them when you're going first, but that's a card that's in the deck primarily to assist when going second in mirror matches, and to assist to catch back up at certain points of the game where you need to help remove things, with Long Came Zeus being a little bit of a clunky card at times, not the best or the easiest to sing as opposed to the 3-cost songs, but Ursula being able to accommodate that, as well as be a body that you can sing a Storm or a Strength on, and then heal up with Rapunzel in a pinch if they don't have any characters against blue-red. A huge part of that card's being an option I don't think I'm going to remove. And Piglet, while you could easily say that it should be extra copies of Smee, the one lore on the difference there does matter, and also Piglet helping complement the Smees that do exist still, by making it so they don't die, or since it is a captain keeping them alive. Having a kind of variety, I think is a good place to be. Smee is a fine card. Again, it's much better going second. It's not really a card I'm almost ever looking to play going first. I'd play, and I guess circling back to the 2-cost cards, aside from Ursula, I think Piglet and Smee are cards that kind of are overlooked and often easily cut in some ways by people for cards like the shift packages and things like that. But you do need certain cards in your deck that have just a lot of lore. That's one of the key things this deck struggles with, and why it is still at a disadvantage against the Sapphire control decks, whether it be blue steel, I guess less blue steel, but more blue red than anything else. Previously with shift lines, and just with shift lines, really, you're not getting a lot of lore or closing speed really to end the game before they can do their thing out of cards, unless you're spending a ton of resources. That makes their kind of 1-for-1 removal or 2-for-1 removal even more devastating. Be Prepareds and Medusas and Maleficent Dragons are even worse, and often the ways to kind of get around that is to set them up with shift lines, and when you do that, you get Sisu'd, and then the following turn, your bigger shift card that you had to then play just gets killed by a dragon. And it really plays with their game plan pretty nicely if you have to set up multiple shift lines at once. You still do have a couple, of course, in this deck, the better ones, the Hood and Cinderella. But I think Queen is just a bit unnecessary right now. The body is very unimpressive. The effect on the card has rarely come up. It does come up sometimes when you have a Tinkerbell going, or a shifted Cinderella that can challenge ready characters, but I found more often than not it's kind of wasted, and I don't really want the body in my deck. We still see, of course, Cinderellas, Robin Hoods, kind of maxed out, Ariels, Pete's. Pete was impressive the entire weekend. It at key points stopped my opponents from clearing my board in the mirror match. It ended the game. It's much more of a checkmate card than anything else, where you're able to kind of just quest out and kind of not care what happens to your board, because you're able to from hand play Piglet, Smee, Pete in the mid to late game in the mirror match, where you get to a point where you're at 13 lore and you just played 6 or 7 lore worth of things that are readied and can't be challenged, and they can't play actions to kill anything. So Pete helps kind of clinch games, and also is very important against Ruby Amethyst to have in the mid to late game, where you want to be able to kind of place a bet that you're going to Hole in the World into a Pete, kind of weigh your odds in that situation, because more often than not, one of the biggest scary things that happen when you're playing a Hole in the World is that you put them into more Be Prepareds, but often one turn is all you need for you to run away with the game, and Pete gives you that kind of one turn. So being able to plan for it, being able to Hole in the World, leave 3 ink up to then play a Pete if you draw one is crucial a lot of times, and why I'm still not dreaming of cutting one. It's really good going second in the mirror matches, just at letting you kind of develop when they've seemingly had a huge, momentum built song start with Cinderella and Ursula and Ariel. You can Pete, get a little bit of a tempo back in your favor, but not too many changes aside from that in this deck. Kind of the flexible cards. The third Cinderella was always kind of in excess, in my opinion, in the deck. I liked it because it's a very good card in the mirror match, but it is a card that doesn't do things until it wins the game, and I think we could use a little bit less of those. And I think Tinkerbell fills that kind of gap a little bit nicely, and 2 is still fine. You'll still see it when, on occasion, and it is just an incredible body, one of the best cards to have in play in the game. But I wish we could have 3. I can't really fit everything into the deck. Again, there was a lot of hard cuts in this deck for me. And you might say things like, why is Bare Necessities there? Bare Necessities is a very flexible card. It's not ideally a great card. I often view it as extra copies of Pete in against Be Prepareds, just to make sure the way is clear. Getting the just information of looking at your opponent's hand or taking a location has been really important. It happens a lot against Ruby Amethyst, where they have Be Prepared, and sometimes you actually don't mind if they Be Prepared, and you just want to make sure that after the Be Prepared they can't develop the location. So I've certainly had situations where I've just saw a Be Prepared and a Queen's Castle and just let them Be Prepared the board because they was on turn 7, and I was just able to rebuild way faster than them. I just didn't want them to be able to do anything to where if they drew a second Be Prepared, I'd be even worse trouble. So kind of playing around one in the future, but neither here nor there. Bare Necessities I think is really good against the Sapphire decks when you're going second, helping tag cards like Fishbone Quill. Probably the best card in the game against this deck is Fishbone Quill. That does not mean that I really want item removal. I want to be very focused. The item removal cards would be coming at the expense of the flexible cards and the aggressive cards, meaning the Petes, Piglets, Ursulas, Smees, or even Tinkerbells, which I've come to kind of like a little bit. So fitting in cards like Benja, which are situational at best and not always very impactful all the time, since the body is susceptible to Sisu. I'm just kind of letting that part of the game go. And if they have a Quill, they have a Quill, and I'm not going to really look to answer it. Same goes for Dime or anything like that. I'm just going to move on and just try and win other ways. And that's certainly something you can do. You can play around it or play into it or be cognizant of it, or try and get card advantage other ways other than the Hole in the World if they're Fishbone Quilling a bunch and have a bunch of items and things, don't have many cards in hand. You can just try not to give them cards the best you can. That certainly can be difficult at times when you have multiple Hole in the Worlds in your hand. You really want to keep the momentum going and don't let like a big threat come down and blow you out in that matchup. But it is a balancing act. There's again a lot of things to consider. I've been pretty firmly in my decision to remove. There was a debate between removing a Storm or a Zeus. I think I liked removing the Storm over the Zeus. Storm is a very good card, not going to deny that. It's a card I would usually play 4 of, but to fit everything I wanted to, basically to fit the Grab Your Swords in the deck, which is just another powerhouse kind of play in the mirror match and against a lot of decks, just a lot of character-based decks, anything like that. Really impressive and can come down and just end the game. Some people just are praying that it never exists in your deck or anything like that. So it is a powerful card and probably worthy of inclusion. It's hard. I wanted to see last weekend at Charlie's Collectibles at the 10K to see if I needed it or not. I didn't think I needed it, but I wanted to try it here. It was my big thing. So I don't, again, think it's necessary. I think the previous version of this list is still very good. I don't know that Tinkerbell is necessary either. I don't think I'd play Tinkerbell and not Grab Your Swords, or even vice versa. I don't know if I'd play Grab Your Swords without Tinkerbell, because honestly, Grab Your Swords doesn't kill a ton of things. It can with a lot of planning and setup and challenging, but I think the combination of the two really, really does kind of give the deck a certain type of threat to where they have to really pace themselves in a lot of ways, having seen both. So still a big fan of Lantern. Lantern helps you kind of go through your game plan pretty seamlessly and run pretty smoothly. Gets to the later part of the game quicker than your opponent in the mirror match. Good going first, good going second. At catching yourself back up while not doing nothing with your turn, really. You essentially think of investing your turn 2 to get an additional ink for the next 5 turns. You've gotten 7 ink out of your 2 ink cards. You've gotten, in that instance, 3 additional ink than you would have otherwise throughout the game. So it really does go a long way, and you can use it immediately, of course. It helps sometimes delay your decisions on what 1-drop you want to play, whether you even want to or not. If your ink is a little bit awkward, you can not play a 1-cost card on turn 1. On turn 2, ink something, play the Lantern, and then play the 1-cost card. Sure, you may lose out on the lore in that instance, but it's often worth it to give yourself a little more flexibility. But I'm a really big fan of this list. I'm still working on a lot of things. I'm trying to figure out the numbers on if the 4th Naveen can come back, how that looks. But the issue with Steel Song is always going to be, and always has been, it has a high uninkable count because of the songs that are in it are just uninkable. Since set 1, it was a Hole in the World and Grab Your Sword, and we had Be Our Guest in our deck, I think, at the time too. But since set 2, Storm and Strength. Strength's been the best card, and I don't think I would play less than 4 ever. Storm has been a card I've played 3 or 4 of. Usually been 4, but sometimes 3, and And Zeus also just proven itself to be way better than I initially thought it was going to be when the set came out. So I think the song package is pretty solid here and pretty kind of tight as far as you want to do. And Rapunzel's an amazing card too. I think people who complain that it's often dead in matchups has never really played with the card very well. They don't play it very well because I've never had a Rapunzel be truly dead. I guess maybe in my finals opponent's match against the Emerald deck, that might have been the worst deck it was in there for, but I still drew cards off with it in that matchup simply by using songs on my own characters. But yeah, this card, I can't figure out what to really go from here. I think that this deck and last week's decks are not incorrect, but I don't know if they're correct, if that makes sense. They're not wrong, and I changed them because they were wrong. They were right, but I wanted to see if something else was also right. So I'm trying to find out what's wrong and what's right and how to go from here, because Las Vegas is going to be a big tournament. You're going to have a lot of varying matchups right now. There's a plethora of decks you can play against. I think a lot of the same mainstays kind of ported over from the last few sets. Some came back a little bit stronger. Some kind of just got a couple new tools and are very much the same kind of strategy, Amber Steel songs included. And that's kind of what we're seeing there. This deck kind of add and develop new cards from each set and kind of go from there. But this is really the deck that I'm fairly confident. I was toying with the idea of trying out a different strategy so that it wasn't known to every one of my opponents I played against in Las Vegas that I was playing Amber Steel songs, because that is a bit of a disadvantage. My opponents knowing that, in game one before the game starts, they get to mulligan with that knowledge. And who knows, maybe I'll have some crazy idea and then have a last minute change of heart and play something else and fool everyone. But I don't think that's going to happen. This deck is still by far, I think, the best deck to play, power level wise and efficiency wise. It's the most punishing deck that you can play against. It punishes your opponent not doing anything on the first couple turns. It beats all the random decks that can exist. That's one of the reasons that I've always liked playing this deck, is because the card Whole New World kind of invalidates a lot of the nonsensical things that your opponents can do and really be competitive. The card is kind of it warps the game since the beginning. Not to say that it's too powerful, because the game is somewhat balanced around it, I think. But it is a very powerful card, and I'm going to be playing it for as long as I can foresee. It just, draw 7 is a card that's restricted and banned in other games, and this game we get to play 4 and have fun with it and play it for 0. So until they change something like that, I might just keep playing it. So it's unlikely that I'm going to have any time to play a different deck and feel confident enough in it, more so than this in Las Vegas. So look for me playing this deck there. Whether it's this version, the previous version, I don't know. I would say at this point equally as likely. I will be going through every deck I expect to see again or play against next week. That's gonna be my big thing. But just to kind of start, my procedure for how I mulligan has been widely kind of inquired about. I can't really answer specifics because a lot of that comes down to a lot of different factors, and me writing all that out in response is a little bit rough. Happy to go through that in coaching, other things like that for specific questions, for whatever reason you have, certain different opinions on you want to discuss, and that's good. Discussion is always welcome. I'm never going to say you're 100% wrong, except when you are, and you should know. But that doesn't happen too often. Usually this game is highly subjective, and sometimes you feel right about it. But I do have a couple things I'm going to go through here, including some hands we'll go through with some of what I just said I can't do through writing a lot, but I'm going to do through video here. It's just much easier than me typing out probably 1,000 words per response. Not that I wouldn't be happy to do it. I just don't have the time, unfortunately. But quickly kind of looking at the deck, if you've not kind of played it or don't really know what it's about or want to just know what you're looking for. Now, I really don't like looking for certain cards in the deck when you mulligan. I'm a really conservative mulliganer, and we'll show that here in just a few minutes. I did a little bit of the mulligans last time as well, but I'm going to go through a brief kind of discussion piece about the mulligans here, which we're going to go through the 5 kind of holy grail cards. I like to call them that. These are the 5 cards that I don't know if I've ever mulliganed, or I don't think you should mulligan in any really capacity. I don't think, maybe if you have a second copy of them, you'd either mulligan or not. Sometimes if your hand looks kind of, really well set up, that has a whole new world to kind of ditch things and something keeping as ink, you'll still keep them. But these are the 5 most important cards, and the cards I usually will. I don't think I will mulligan play versus draw in any matchup. They're for multiple reasons. One, Robin Hood Shift Line is one of the best things you can do early on. It helps you sing a whole new world early. It helps you challenge the board early, both Robin Hood 1 and Robin Hood 5. I will keep Robin Hood 5 without Robin Hood 1 if I'm mulliganing a few cards to be a good, I call them connectors, where you get to pair the 1 and the 5. It was much more common when there was 2 shift lines that you kept, either piece. Maybe you kept like a Queen and a Robin Hood without either 1 drop because you're seeing, X to 8 cards versus X to 4 with only 1, but the same logic still holds true. I'll never mulligan an aerial. I'll mulligan the 3rd aerial, and I'll have to think about the 2nd aerial. If there's 3 in hand, I'll probably mulligan 1 just because I don't want to have to, because in that scenario, you're likely to have to ink one of them. I don't really want to do that if I can help it. The 2nd one, I'll just make sure my game plan's mapped out and my hand wants the 2nd aerial. And again, things change with the whole new world. Cinderella and Robin Hood, especially when going blind, these cards are the best things to do. This deck does have fewer 1-cost cards than other versions of Steel Song. It only has 8. I've seen decks up to 15, which I think is a little bit too high because I don't play this deck as an aggressive deck. Not to say that it doesn't get aggressive, but I don't view this deck, and my mentality when playing is not I need to be aggressive or want to be aggressive. I can be aggressive if the situation and the game state calls for it and the matchup. Here below, these are kind of the 3 matchups I expect to play against the most. Ruby Amethyst is a matchup there, and again, I'm keeping these cards against every one of these 3 matchups. And we'll go into mulligans basically on the play, on the draw, and blind, or against one of these 3 decks in a minute. But these cards up top here, 5, I'm never going to mulligan in any hand under any circumstance. They're going to be in my hand, at least one of them. You could say if there's 2 Robin Hoods, I'll probably keep 1. If there's 3 aerials, I'll probably keep 2. Or if there's 2 aerials, I may or may not keep the 2nd, depending on the rest of the hand, kind of thing. If I have 2 Robin Hoods, I'll probably keep 1, but maybe keep the 2nd for ink. And not to say that I'm always playing these cards out. Let's just say this was my 5-card hand and I mulligan 2 things, and it would highly depend on what the other 2 cards are as to how this hand is played. I may not always play a 1-cost out, depending on what the other 2 cards are. I may just ink one of them and pass it. It really does depend on what they are, and the biggest thing with this deck is remaining flexible with your plays. Don't tunnel vision yourself into, this costs 1, I have to play it. That's the end of the story. Everything is contextual. This deck changes from turn to turn what you can do and what's valuable and what's not. One of the best parts about Lantern, if you have Lantern, I value the 1-cost Robin Hood a lot less. Not to say, again, I won't keep it, but there's this situation where I'm going to be inking it instead of trying to sit for a shift line because the extra ink is just worth it. And again, shift is inherently card disadvantage, so if there's no whole new world involved, then I'm unlikely to want to play out Robin Hood and not just ink it with a Lantern. Ariel, of course, 18 hits in the deck, pretty high song count. I think it's a reasonable amount. I think 17 is the minimum I want to go to, 16 is the minimum I've ever played, really, but 18 is good enough to be consistent. But these are the cards I like the most. Some of the cards that are debatable, that I get a lot of questions about, we'll start with just basically the songs. These are the 3 songs I've considered keeping. Again, I'm not saying that everything else besides the cards you're seeing on the screen are cards to be mulligans. That is not the case. It will completely depend on the other cards in the hand. There are many games I played where I just kept a singular Smee, I kept a singular Ursula, I kept a Rapunzel and a Lantern, it does depend what you're putting back because of how many uninkables you're putting back. It depends on what you're keeping for whatever kind of game plan you're crafting. It depends on if you just need something to do on turn 2 and you just want to keep a 2-drop that's fine to be ink. Piglet's a fine card sometimes to keep in some matchups because it's either one of the worst cards in the matchup, like against the mirror match, it's not really good till very late, or it's one of the best cards against blue-red and you just play it on turn 2 and maybe get 6 lore out of the deal. So you don't know all the time, and even in matchups where you do know, the rest of your hand will dictate what to play against. So unfortunately, there is no golden rule as to what to keep or mulligan, in my opinion, except for the ones up top here. I think I'll not ever mulligan these cards. Not to say that there aren't worlds where I may mulligan. There are worlds I've mulliganed Ariel. Typically, it's been against matchups where I know that there is no Ursula to Deceiver to take my whole world in my hand, and I have a Robin Hood shift line in my hand. I want to keep the Ariels in my deck. So if I'm going first and I have a whole new world and I have the ability to shift on 3, then I probably don't need the Ariel. I'd rather have it in my deck for later. But As a pretty general rule, these are the 5 cards I don't mulligan if I can help it. But blind, I should say. I don't mulligan these cards blind because I'll still keep Ariel in a situation where I have the Whole World Shift in case they play a Ursula blind. But yeah, let's get to the first couple cards here. These ones we'll go through pretty briefly. A Whole New World. I'm going to start with this rule too. I never keep the card going second. I don't like keeping the card going second. I don't care the matchup going second. I don't want the card in my hand. The opportunity cost of drawing a second one is so bad if you draw a second one off your redraw, and also sometimes you can just screw yourself over with ink. I do not keep Whole New World going second, period. I just don't do it. I can't think of a matchup or a situation where I'd want to do that. I'm just not going to do it. I suggest you don't do it. I don't care what your reasoning is or what the rest of your hand is. I don't care if you can shift Robin Hood on turn 3 with Whole New World. It's probably not good enough going second, honestly. You're probably giving them more of an advantage. So yeah, going first, I will probably keep Whole New World under 2 situations, granted that I know I'm not playing against Ursula. Sometimes against Ursula, I'll risk it and keep it anyway. That's, again, only in situations where I either A, have the Robin Hood shift line for turn 3 and sufficient ink, or if I have Naveen and Lantern. Keep in mind, though, in that situation where you have Naveen and Lantern in your hand and a Whole New World, that's 3 uninkable cards. You need to make sure that the rest of your hand has some ink, at least 3 inkables in that situation. So you may keep certain cards just to specifically be ink in that situation where you're trying to play Whole New World on turn 3 in these types of matchups here. Again, Emerald matchups change a lot because they can interact with you. I don't usually, in mirror matches, consider bare necessities the same way I would consider Ursula for these types of mulligan decisions. If they have bare necessities on turn 2, it's unlikely they're going to be singing it with a Cinderella because going second, Cinderella is very vulnerable to an opposing Cinderella. So it's unlikely that situation will play out often, or they may plan for it not to play out that way by playing a different kind of 1-drop or not playing one. It all will depend on if you're going first or second, or what the rest of your hand looks like and what their hand looks like. This game has a lot of permutations similar to chess. It may be a greater disparity than chess. Maybe that's a little bit much, but it's close. It's in the thousands of different permutations the first couple turns of each game. But yes, next card is Let the Storm Rage On. I usually don't keep songs in my hand. Again, I'm kind of saying that again, usually don't. I will sometimes keep songs for ink. I've kept strength for ink before. That's been fine if the rest of my hand makes sense. I have, the Naveen Lantern Whole New World hand, and I've kept strength because, like I mentioned, I want an ink. I usually will not keep Let the Storm Rage On unless I have a Cinderella in my hand. That's kind of my general rule. Ursula is all a card that I don't plan on keeping in my hand under most circumstances. It's fine going second, honestly, but I don't plan on it too often. But Let the Storm Rage On is only good if I have Cinderella or an Ursula, I believe. I don't really want to play it under any other circumstances. So Storm, and this is play or draw, Storm gets a lot worse going second, but it is also very good going second because it helps catch you up from being behind by just getting kind of the free deal 2 damage if you can sing it. But it makes your character vulnerable to cards like Mim, Fox in that situation as well. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword against the Ruby Amethyst decks. There's always a danger that you're playing against Ruby Sapphire if you're going first and you have Cinderella Storm, that it just doesn't do anything for a few turns and you have to storm your own character. Maybe you get to storm their Tipo and you're lucky about that, but that card can be dangerous and dead at times. But I wouldn't keep Cindy Storm without probably keeping a couple cards to be inked just in case something goes poorly, and then you also draw an uninkable card. It can be a little bit rough. But the Bare Necessities. Bare Necessities is a really strange card. I do like it in my opening hand a good bit of the time, and I have kept it blind, kind of in a similar vein to the cards you see up top. It is very powerful going second. It's one of the better cards in the game going second, I think, because most of the key cards that you have to interact with or have a difficult time interacting with cost 3, whether it be primarily Fishbone Quill, which is what Bare Necessities is best at doing. It's a better card going second against Fishbone Quill than it is going first because you're giving them the most opportunity to have drawn Fishbone Quill before you take a look at their hand by playing it on your turn 2 going into their turn 3 versus your turn 2 they're going into their turn 2. They have 2 drop steps to see the Fishbone Quill if they don't have it in hand versus just 1. Much less likely chance they draw one immediately after if you're able to take one. But Bare Necessity is also very good in the mirror match going second too. The mirror match plays out a lot of different ways, and it really is entirely contingent, I believe, on depending on which version they're playing, mainly just Cinderella Ballroom Sensation, and also if they're playing the Queen package, that's also a card to consider. Cinderella makes it so that it's difficult for you to attempt to develop because you're going to get stormed, maybe. And that is a really fast way to lose the game by just playing cards out one at a time. Often it's better to save it until you can play multiple cards in a turn or just not play early characters that get killed by storm. But in that situation where you're holding and not developing characters into the Cinderella, you're then highly vulnerable to the card Whole New World. So, circling back to Bare Necessities, what that card does is in those situations it lets you not develop into the Storm Rage on and then take the Whole New World, so then you don't have to get kind of blown out by them leveraging the fact that you didn't play anything for the first maybe turn or two till you played an Aerial or a Pete even on turn 3 to really kind of dodge the Cinderella interaction, be able to storm way ahead of schedule. So Bare Necessities is very good in the mirror match going second. I will probably keep it going second in the mirror match if I have it, yeah. Maybe even going first because it helps you craft a game plan and really be in control of how the game is going to be played. Of course, they can always Aerial, so maybe if you want to hold it and they don't have a shift character in play to shift on turn 3, whether it be Robin Hood or Queen, you can maybe get a little greedy and wait till after an Aerial comes down maybe to hit that song, but if they have singers developed, it can get a little bit clunky. But these are the cards I'm really looking for. You're seeing here on the screen what I'm okay keeping, what I'm thinking about when I'm making my decisions as far as play versus draw. That can change a lot. And yeah, kind of my holy five, I would say, where you get to kind of just not think as much and probably just keep them. Context is everything, of course. The other two cards do matter, what you're putting back and what you draw into, and is how you play the hand out. But as far as just a general brief mulligan guide to it, I would probably always keep those cards up top. And again, the cards down below, I kind of gave examples as to when they're really good. Storm is one, again, only really Cinderella, maybe Vanessa. Vanessa probably when going first. It's fine if you're planning on playing Vanessa out. If you're planning on playing Lantern out instead of Vanessa, then I might not keep the Storm because Lantern's usually the best turn 2 play. I think Vanessa might be better at turn 2 in a mirror match, honestly, just to help have a stable body and sing Zeus's that come off really early, so you can check Aerials and things like that. But yeah, that's my general kind of mulligan guide here, and we're going to do a few sample mulligans here. So give me just a minute. Play versus draw as well. So I have gotten right here to where'd it go? All right, we're on the website here. I believe we're on Dreamborn doing this, and yeah, first hand. So we're going to do a couple things here. I have my 3 matchups, and I have blind. So we're going to start here. We are on the play. So blind on the play. I mentioned before here, cards I do like to keep. There's a lot of the ones we just looked at here, right? So we have the Cindy and the Storm, and we have the Robin Hood shift line for Whole New World. My main concern would be is if I'm going to be able to actually make it to this Whole New World with Robin Hood shift with the amount of uninkables I have, because if my plan is to play a Cinderella on turn 1 and then a Robin Hood on turn 2, I have nothing else to ink if they don't play anything on turn 1. And people are usually, again, skeptical, or they should be, about playing things into the Cinderella on turn 1. So it's almost as though they're conflicting in some way, for my opinion. I would go as far as to say I might actually, with this hand, not keep these cards here, and at least try, when blind, to play for the Whole New World when going first. It's pretty hard to disrupt. It is very powerful against all 3 variations of the decks, but going blind, I would probably mulligan like this, and then redraw into a new hand pretty early on, assuming I have some ink. If I was feeling really conservative, I may keep this as well if I wanted to really be conservative. Cinderella's fine later too. It is a good card to play off of a Whole New World to help set up more singers. And it's also, again, something for us to be really conservative about, just being able to keep another ink. But it is likely that these are both going to be ink in most scenarios. And on the draw. So let us do our on the draw thing here. So we mentioned before, I really don't like to keep I don't like to keep Whole New World going second. Even with the shift line, I'm not really into it. This hand would change a little bit. I think going second, I'd be more about keeping Cindy Storm, because I'm not going to be keeping my Whole New World. And I don't know if I want to keep 2 Storms for the reason I mentioned before, where if you play against Blue-Red, it's pretty poor, and you don't really get a chance to play into it too much. Oops, let's not do that. I'm trying to see if I can look at the screen here and do the thing over here. I didn't set that up as well as I should have. But we're here, and I'm looking to the side because that's where my screen is for this. So here we are. Yeah, this hand I think would be a bit better going second, keeping a Storm in that situation because I'm not playing on Whole New Worlding. Again, you can see how it changed versus play versus draw here. And I would say we could go back to being on the play in the other version we were looking at here, where we decided that we were going to be mulliganing something like this. But let's go through if we knew we were playing against Amber Steel. So let's start with that. Amber Steel. Amber Steel is actually, I don't really like to hole in a world early. I don't really like to keep hole in a world. I don't want to give my opponent cards to then hole in a world with. I'd be much more inclined going first on the play to be keeping something like this. Again, if they do decide to not play cards out, I don't really want holding the second copy of the Storm Rage on. So I just want one in that instance. I'd probably ink a Cindy, play a Cindy, and then have the Storm there. And depending on if there are two cards out there, we'll see. Hopefully they're inkable, and it may be a case where I actually can't play the Cinderella out. I can't even threaten that, because if I have a few uninkables, I really need to lean on this Robin Hood coming down, because it's really helpful when going first. And when going second in this kind of matchup here, I think the mulligan stays about the same. You do have to mulligan for the potential that they don't have a Cinderella, and in a situation where they don't, you'd kind of imagine what their hand is. If it's a Robin Hood, you really want a Cinderella plus Storm. If some people are playing Daisy Duck, you also probably want Cindy plus Storm, and the Queen. In situations where they're playing Lanterns as well, this gets a little bit trickier because they're going first, and then this is probably going to be a dead card. You really need to then develop the Robin Hood, and you can't have two Storms in that instance either. That's really what I feel like in the mirror match, play versus draw. I think it wouldn't change, but I think I'd keep about the same. And that's a matchup where I don't really want to hold the world. So let's go through against blue-red. So if we play against blue-red with this hand on the play, yeah, I'm keeping the extra card to ink. I think I absolutely need to Robin Hood shift on turn 3. And if I'm playing against that matchup and I know it, I'm fine with inking the Cinderella and keeping both for just specifically ink, because there's no way I want to miss. I don't want to have to, in a lot of worlds, just kind of miss on my game plan by drawing some uninkables. That actually happened to me in round 1 of the first challenge in Atlanta. I had a very similar kind of game plan where I was not knowing what I was going to play against. I had a Cindy Storm hand. I kept probably something similar to this, and I think I just drew 4 uninkables in a row or something like that, and I tried Cinderella. I went Cinderella on turn 1, turn 2 Robin Hood, turn 3 I didn't draw an ink, so I stormed my own Cindy, and I just missed again and couldn't shift my Robin Hood. I had to wait a full another turn. So I think in this world I would probably, against blue-red, plan on mulliganing both these and keeping this just for ink to make sure I have that game plan lined up. Going second in that matchup, so let's switch gears here. It is a bit more difficult because this isn't as good. Going second is significantly worse. They have Tipo. They have the ability to brawl my Robin Hood before I can shift. So it's unlikely that's going to work out. I would actually go as far as to keep something like this. I have the shift line available, but I'm really looking for a little bit more of the 2-drops on the draw here, whether it be Lantern, Smee, Piglet, something to get a little bit more aggression going. Even copies of cards like Ariel to help dig to the mid to late game, Rapunzel even, just to have something else going on here and try and see what we go with. I'll eventually probably need to hole in the world, but I think keeping it early, going second, is really just a way to make it so that you're stumbling as well, and trying to make it so that they have to choose between accelerating and answering your threats on curve. For the threat of hole in the world is a really good way to punish them, to make sure that they don't get to develop cards like Fishbone Quell, or they have to make a little bit of choices if they are a little bit late on ink, not being able to develop a high rim for fear of that. But the best way to punish a high rim in the mid game is playing a hole in the world. But yeah. And lastly, let's go back, reset this here. On the play against Ruby Amethyst. So in this matchup here, I think we would also be in a similar boat to what we mentioned before about trying to just hold the world. I think this hand against the decks that we know are going to be character based, where they're going to play something on turn 1 or 2 most likely. Cindy Storm is obviously very powerful, and we're trying to hold the world pretty quickly. It is a little bit tricky again because the uninkable count. We a lot of ways need to play the Storm out, and maybe they're in situations where they just need to call and just say, I hope you don't have it. Or they play like a Minnie Mouse or an Olaf, which is picked up a little bit for this matchup, and still storm their character anyway, even though they can pick it up with Snake. And then Robin Hood on turn 3. But I like keeping something like this going first. Hole in the World is a really powerful card at just making sure that you get to play, ahead and keep going ahead. I think the matchup against Ruby Amethyst has gotten significantly better when going first. It was always, I think, a little bit favored for whoever was going first, but I think now it's maybe much more favorsome going first for Steel Song than it is for Ruby Amethyst. I think they're a little bit favored when going first with Ruby Amethyst, not like 51-49 kind of thing, where I think when Steel Songs is going first, it's more like 57 to 56 kind of thing versus 43, where it's way better. And that's just how I've felt the matchup has played out a lot for me. So play draw matters a little bit, but still I think is going to come down to key moments, plays, and sometimes a little bit of luck too. That's just how the games work. But against that matchup, yeah, I would be, again, on the play, looking to just play that kind of game plan here. But on the draw, I'm going to probably do something similar, but I'm going to keep... I'm not going to keep the home world. I want to, again, try and develop. There's a lot of times where I just want to make sure that I'll eventually find a home world off of an aerial or off of a... or just find it naturally, and I don't want to risk drawing a second one because that's one of your best cards in the matchup, just making sure you can keep churning through your deck and keep making their card advantage tools like Rabbit and things like that not matter. Friends on the other side, all that. So those kind of things kind of get devalued a bit. And I want at least one Storm to maybe tag. They can't play a Flynn, or if I just need to help finish something else off, or if at some point in time I maybe, Cindy, they don't do anything, I play Robin Hood, I shift, I trade in, and then I want to help something else, like protect my Robin Hood more by storming something else there. Or in situations where they're playing very defensively and don't let me challenge anything with Robin Hood, I want to be able to storm my own Robin Hood for Rapunzel, so I'm then drawing to Rapunzel, Ariel, or Whole New World to really play, and that's a lot of draws. So yeah, that's this hand with those three matchups. Again, blind, on the play, on the draw, and three different matchups. So let's just say we are playing this matchup and we are on the play because we are awesome and we are very good at dice rolls. So again, kind of going first this matchup, I'd probably keep something similar to this, and just we draw into probably the best card. So with this kind of hand, actually, just a brief moment here, having drawn the Lantern, I'm actually just not going to play Cindy Storm. I'm just going to go turn 1 Robin Hood, go turn 2 Lantern, turn 3 shift Robin Hood. I probably get to ink before then too. It will depend most likely on turn 2 if I get to play the second Cinderella out. In that world where I draw any inkable card, I can go turn 1 Cinderella, ink, Robin Hood, go, turn 2 whatever I drew, ink, if it's an inkable card, then play Lantern into Cindy, and then I have functionally 3 ink left over on my turn 3 already in play, whether I draw ink or not, to have the Cinderella ready to then sting. So from baseline, I don't need any more cards in my hand to be functional. It's very good to plan out, okay, worst case scenario, I ink this, play this, and if I draw an uninkable, then I ink this, play this, pass, and I can still do my game plan, so I'm still fine. You get kind of bonus points if you immediately draw an inkable card and can develop an extra Cinderella, it can be very important. Or something crazy could happen, like you played a turn 1 Robin Hood, and then turn 2 you drew something like a Naveen, and that might change what you want to do with the game plan. Maybe even it could even, that situation, actually be wrong to have played the Robin Hood turn 1 if you drew Naveen immediately, because you might just be Naveening Whole New World instead of shifting Robin Hood, and in that situation you'd want the Cinderella in play. I'd still probably play the Robin Hood most likely because it's just Naveen that changes that plan, but who knows. But yeah, new game. Let's try this again here. Let's do maybe 2 more of this little exercise just to kind of go through more sample hands. All right, this hand's a little flat, but we'll see how it goes. On the play blind, we kind of have a lot of the key pieces here for me. I don't mind keeping a Rapunzel. I don't really want to keep them for ink too often. It's fine, and it may be something we get to leverage in a good way. Rapunzel is a card I usually don't mind keeping when going first, because it's often they're going to trade into your things, or you're going to be afforded the luxury to be able to sing something on your own character to heal. But going second, playing a much more reactive or a much more punished hand, these are more likely going to be ink, and they are very valuable in the mid to late game, so I'd like to have more in my deck if I can. But this is a reasonable hand, I think, blind going first. And going second, kind of mentioning what I just mentioned there, I think the only change would be I would get rid of the extra Rapunzel. So blind going first is different by just the card, and the reason being is because I have more cards to potentially catch up, and I feel like I'm much less likely to be able to utilize this card going second than going first, because they're going to be able to act first. Not to say I won't be able to challenge and kind of react going second, but I think that mattering is going to be less relevant than if I just had a Lantern or a Cindy plus a song to sing. So digging towards those is a little bit better. And I get to keep both Robin Hoods because I don't mind one of them being ink. There's a small world where I want to just play a second one out on turn 2, depending on the rest of my hand. If I have a big Robin Hood and a Whole New World, then that felt really good to be able to ensure that I get to do that on turn 3 by having the second one being played out. So that's a little bit different play versus draw, not too much. In the mirror match, let's just say we're going first on the play. The first going first in the play, I think this hand would be about here, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't change too much. No, so wrong. This is about what I do going first, okay? Going second, I may go as far as to keep something like this. If I was on the draw. On the play, it remained the same. On the draw, I'd probably do something like this. And the reason being is I think that the most likely situation is us not playing anything on turn 1 against a Cinderella, playing 2 Robin Hoods on turn 2, to hopefully that if they have to, not if they've developed a second singer, I should say. If they developed an Ursula, you don't really want to play 2 on 2 because you're still vulnerable to 2 songs, where the reason to play 2 ones on turn 2 is that if they do sing with their Cinderella on turn 1, that they play on turn 1, you can then challenge into it. But if they have the ability to kind of sing again anyway with the character they played, like a Vanessa or a second Cinderella, it doesn't make any sense. But in that scenario, if that happens and they're able to answer, then we're able to kill off their Cinderella with this Robin Hood and then play our Ariel. Our Ariel gets answered. We then are able to sing with our Naveen or play our Naveen to then hopefully catch back up, either having found a Storm, a Zeus or something like that, to then just trade with their character. So a little bit more defensive. It is a little bit stranger to keep a higher cost card going second. And in that situation, because I'm keeping this card going second, I need to keep another ink, is my thought process for the Rapunzel. And I'd rather have the songs on my deck later in the game than the Rapunzel even. But a little bit interesting, a little bit different. This is on the play and this is on the draw. Just again, preparing for how the games are going to feel and going second. It does change. And let's just say against blue-red. So we're on the draw versus blue-red. All right, so on the draw versus blue-red, I think we're actually looking very similar to our on the play with against Amber Steel, where I kind of want to just do this. There's a world where Naveen makes sense, but I wouldn't do it without a song. That's important. This just helps me get essentially a 1-cost 2/2 out of my deck, which is not typically very good. Lets me still develop something on turn 1 going second against blue-red. And then maybe lets me draw a Piglet or a Lantern or a Smee just to get some lore going early. And Ariel can be threatening. A lot of the blue-red decks have trimmed down on the copy of Brawl that they have. They've gone more in favor of the Sisu that they can shift onto, meaning that they need a combination of Ice Block and Sisu to then kill Ariel. So it's a little bit more likely to live. And again, it's on my no mulligan cards because it's just a very good card. And in this world, we get to develop early, probably anchor second Robin Hood and see what else we get in that situation. Most games you're going to play are not fully realized until you see about 10 cards from your deck. It's really hard to play this game without having seen 10 cards. You don't know what's going to happen because of how the inking system works. And the flexibility of some cards can change based off of one single card. So really understanding what it's like and what changes each turn is very important to keep in mind when you're playing the deck. Personally, I don't think this changes on the play. I think it looks a little bit better, and I have the opportunity to be less aggressive if I need to against this matchup. Not to say I won't be aggressive if I can, but the need to be that way and the way I may view some of the cards may change based off that. This still gives me opportunities to find copies of Whole New World on the play to pair with the Robin Hood, the big Robin Hood, and the Ariel to dig. So if you're looking at it from I'm going first, I can potentially Whole New World on turn 4 or turn 3 even. You're seeing between the mulligan 4 additional cards, so you've seen 11 cards, and then you're seeing 2 draw steps and then 4 more cards, so you've seen 17 cards to a Whole New World, then 18 the turn after. So you're seeing a good chunk of your deck to find Whole New World. That's why it's the most consistent Whole New World deck. Ariel's just a big part of that and why this deck is so good. But let's go to another matchup here. Let's go on the draw against Ruby Amethyst. So here, again, I think a lot of it still holds true. I think I'm back to just doing something like this, where I may keep the Rapunzel. It's unlikely they can answer the Ariel on curve, and Rapunzel can be pretty good if you happen to pull a Robin Hood off. It's sometimes when going second, you don't want to get in Whole New World that often, or in certain situations you may. But against Ruby Amethyst, being able to draw a bunch of cards and keep up with their rabbits really can be important, and Rapunzel is one of the best parts about doing it. So maybe going second with this type of hand where I'm pretty sure I'm going to have an early game presence and an Ariel to boot, it's fine enough to keep this kind of hand going second. Going first, I would probably do the same thing where I'm just being a little bit more aggressive, maybe digging for that kind of Whole New World effect from this kind of hand. In that matchup, it can be devastating. If you get to Whole New World on turn 3 with a shift, they really have sometimes nothing in play on those turns. They have plenty of cards that cost 1 and 2, but sometimes it doesn't work out or line up right because they are pretty conservative about mulliganing. They sometimes have clunky cards in their hand like Be Prepared. So their hand may dictate, what they have to ink to develop their rabbits, and they have to plan for that. Otherwise, they're going to be in trouble in the late game if they don't plan with their ink early on very well. But yeah, this I think changes again just by a card on the draw, because I want to make sure that I have some way to draw cards. Going first, I think I'm much more likely to want to try for the whole world line. But yeah, that's on the play versus draw. I think just the card changes. But next up here, let's do another hand, and we're going to be on the play. But I guess we'll stay. We were on the play against blue-red, and we tried to dig, and we kept this hand against blue-red. There we go. We have our line. We actually have a very, very good hand against them. This is one of the rare occurrences where if we know our 8th card is an inkable card, we get to go triple 1-drop, shift, Hole in the World. This is one of the best hands we could have against them, so good for us. I guess it would maybe improve with a Piglet, but I actually don't think it would. I think this is about as good as it gets for them. Against them, you'd go ink the Champion Sherwood, play the Beloved Outlaw. Turn 2, you'd ink the Aerial or any inkable card you may draw. Again, you need to have an inkable to make the 3 1-drops happen. But if you draw an inkable and then play these 2, and then you can ink whatever else, the Aerial even, to Robin Hood, shift, Hole in the World. No cards in hand. Here you go. I have 3 cards in play. It's turn 3. Hopefully you had an acceleration on turn 2 or you're in big trouble. So yeah, hands like that. But new game. Let's start here again. We're going to remove the color thing here. We're going to just start with new game, blind. Okay. This hand is not the most difficult. It actually has not very many of the cards we like to have. On the play, blind. And I mentioned before the kind of 5 cards I always want to keep. I always want to keep Lantern. I want to keep Cinderella, Robin Hood, Ariel. Again, that doesn't mean I won't keep other cards. So I want that to remain kind of seen when I say those things. There are plenty of other cards I'm going to keep. This hand is very interesting. I'll say that much. I am tempted on the play to just mulligan this. And the sequencing with that thought process would be I would actually not be playing Cinderella this game either. Most likely for this hand would be I'd be inking and passing. Turn 2 I'd be playing Ursula to then be able to use the Zeus. And then turn 3 I would be inking, playing Lantern, and then also Smee. And I have Ursula, Smee, Lantern on turn 3, staying with Ursula to kill something. That'd be my game plan with this hand so far. It obviously will change because we're going to see 3 more cards before then in that situation. So this is a very possible good hand. It really depends. It fights pretty well. It has a lot of meaty characters. It has Ursula, Lantern, and Smee. Lantern digs you to that point or accelerates you to that point where you can play some of your bigger cards and not need the 1-cost cards. And we also essentially in that scenario, not having developed cheap cards early, don't have to draw them later because we're taking 2 of the 8 out of our deck by just having them be our first 2 ink. Another way to attempt this hand and kind of really push for a bit more, I would think would be I think that this is a reasonable keep. What I would actually do, it'd be really hard to tell, given the situation, that's a potential line you can take with this deck. I think there's also worlds where you want to be a little more aggressive going first and just keep something like this, where you can dictate if you want this Ursula even at all. Again, when going first, I value this card a little bit less than I otherwise would. The context of keeping the Zeus was pretty important, but at this point in my mind, it's going to be ink, and I think I like it a little bit less so than having a Cinderella to set up a shift line later in my deck, putting this one back instead of this one back for ink purposes. This gives us the opportunity to draw into Aerials, Hole in the Worlds, Naveen's, and we have 2 ink for our Lantern, and then potentially Naveen, depending on the rest of our hand being drawn, so we have a pretty good aggressive start, and I like where we're at here. On the draw, this changes a bit. I do believe that going second, I would still probably keep these 3 blind. I don't think I would keep a Zeus going second. It's a little bit too reactive, and even though I mentioned when going first having it there, that's mostly because I want to remain front-footed and could safely develop and protect this Ursula by seeing when going first on turn 3. Going second, they're going to have a turn 4 play potentially, and that does seem susceptible to a lot of different things, and I don't really like keeping songs going second often. Going first, that was an exception. Really, it's very rare you'd want to keep the songs not the songs we mentioned going first, but if you have a good feeling or if you feel like you can sculpt a game plan around it, keeping one song, and Along Came Zeus is important, but not the most important, so getting hit by discard isn't the worst in the world. But I think on the draw, I would be pretty inclined to keep the Smee in addition. Potentially for ink, potentially because it might be good in certain situations, but this game plan may go the same way. And thinking about it more, it may be correct in the world where I kept essentially this going first to have also mulliganed this for similar reasons, because the Smee will probably be invalid going first most likely, depending on the rest of our hand. But again, context is everything. I think going second, I'd probably just keep these, setting myself up to draw into certain songs, or set myself up to draw into a whole new world and then have singers in play. So let's just say on the draw, we're playing against Amber Steel. A mirror match on the draw with this kind of hand, I would be pretty happy to get rid of these here. This Cinderella is going to be kept for ink most likely. Smee is pretty good later in the game, being a 3 health character that can survive and can help threaten with Pete to end the game. I like Cinderella to be able to threaten if they don't have a Cinderella to play it out, or be ink. Lantern helps me catch up going second, and Ursula also helps me going second as well. All these 3 cards are very good. This is a pretty good card to ink, so I'll have to draw it later. Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of this hand going second. On the play, I would shift to this and just dig a little bit deeper, be a little bit more aggressive with me choosing to try and find a way to interact or a way to play a whole new world quickly, and it'd be really, really powerful. But yeah, that's on the play there. And let's say against, if I know I'm playing against Ruby Amethyst, or sorry, Ruby Sapphire. If I know I'm playing against Ruby Sapphire, I'm probably going to be doing something like this. And I'm not certain if I'm playing the Cinderella out. Cinderella's pretty poor. Cinderella is one of the worst cards into Ruby Sapphire because it gets CC'd. But I might be keeping it to ink. It would depend on the rest of the cards. I wouldn't want to keep both because I want to find one of my better cards. I want to find Robin Hood. I want to find Hold World or Naveen. So I want to just have a little bit of digging for it, but not too much. I still want to keep something to play. And Smee's pretty good pressure early. Lantern, again, on my no mulligan list, so I'm going to keep these. Again, no matter the matchup, I'm keeping these 2 cards, really. We play. And on the draw, the buck kind of stays the same for me. I'm not really looking for anything too different, and this is fine enough to start. I'm not hard mulliganing for certain things. I'm not also throwing the Smee away, because Smee can gain quite a bit of lore early. Just to, if I happen to draw one of the piglets, works out pretty well to quest early and get some pressure that way. Can get upwards of 12 lore early on, then really Pete will help close the game out. Let's see, on the draw versus Ruby Amethyst. So on the draw versus Ruby Amethyst, I think this actually may stay the same here. I'm not too excited to be having the Zeus's early. They're not actually very good in that matchup. They do kill pretty much everything, but that's not really what I want to do. My best target for them is always going to be the locations. Being able to answer those immediately is something this deck can't really do, and the other songs and the other cards, the deck can answer those pretty quickly. So yeah, probably going to get rid of all this here and do the same thing. And on the play, I don't think it changes. This is an odd hand. Again, it's kind of a flat hand where there's a couple good cards and a couple kind of medium answers. The Zeus is kind of make it a flat hand where it's not really something I'm looking to keep too often. There's worlds where I'd want to keep it going first. Again, it's very rare, but there's the potential. I wanted to at least address that in my first mulligan discussion point there with that. But yeah, let's just say we're on the play, and on the draw, this stays the same too. Sometimes it doesn't matter play versus draw. The hand is very similar. But let's say on the play, Ruby Amethyst, we mulligan 4, and cool. We have some things to do. Interesting. This is a hand I actually wouldn't play anything on turn 1 going first with. It's a little odd because I don't have anything to do with the Naveen, but I'm still planning to Naveen early if I can. I'm just assuming I'm going to draw something better. I think I'd be inking the Cinderella and passing. And then give myself the turn 2 potential if they play something that they either don't want to pick up or don't think I have, and then I play the Smee as ink, play Lantern, and then play Cinderella at that point. The reason I don't want to develop a second body is if I'm going to have to use Naveen Strength for whatever reason, I want more bodies in play. But this Strength isn't looking very good either. There's a chance I do that play, and I just go Strength, Naveen, go, and then next turn Rapunzel it, because they can't really interact with the Naveen at that point. So very weird hand. It may or may not work out. It doesn't seem that great from what I'm looking at right now, but it would need some points. And again, you need about 10 cards to really know how a game's going to play out. If you're in trouble or not, you need to see about 10 cards. So it's hard to really know just based off this, but we have a game plan. And I don't think playing Cinderella on turn 1 is the right call, just because we get to make that decision on turn 2. If we had a Storm here instead, I'd probably play Cinderella on turn 1. But since it's a Strength, not a Storm, whether or not we're going to make use of it effectively, I'm not certain of. And I think that the potential to not even have to play this, not to say it's wrong, but if we ink this and pass And then turn 2, we draw maybe a Robin Hood. Robin Hood seems more appealing at times than Cinderella. We can then make the decision later at that point for what we want to do with the rest of the game. So giving yourself time to make the decisions is pretty important, and flexibility again with every draw step. But let's do one more set of hands here with each of these. And we're starting off new game. All right. Interesting. This one's kind of close. So let's just say we're on the play. Okay. So we do have Naveen Whole New World, right? That's a big part of the hand. And it is good. It is a very good combination of cards to make work. And I'm really fine when I'm on the play with it. I will always keep Naveen Whole New World Lantern. I'm not certain I'll always keep Naveen Whole New World going first. It really depends on the rest of the hand. And I will say, though, this hand is close. Really close for me as to what I would want to do and what I want to see out of this hand. My first thought with the hand would be to be a little bit more aggressive, keep maybe an Ursula just to make sure I have a 2, and maybe keep Storm in that instance as well. My second thought here is actually just to keep the entire hand. And that sounds strange. I'll get to it by kind of going through the hands really quick. So in the Amber Steel Mirror match, okay, I don't have a Cinderella, and I have a Whole New World. That's the only part of that that's bad. If my Whole New World is bad, then this is also bad. But I think if I knew the matchup, I wouldn't keep this. But I'm weighing odds here against all 3 of these as to what I'm playing against. And I think against the other 2, the turn 4 Naveen Whole New World is actually pretty good with the setup of Ursula into Pete. And my thought process would be to ink the Strength, ink the Cindy, have the Ursula, storm something, play the Pete, and then Prince Naveen Whole New World. That's kind of my game plan. Just a couple inkables being drawn and kind of go from there. That's the thought behind keeping everything. These would be to keep guaranteed ink, most likely. This would be to interact in some way on turn 2 against an opposing Cinderella or opposing aggressive character of some kind that's in play, a Robin Hood or anything like that. There also is the world where I don't keep the Storm. And I think at that point I could get rid of the Pete. It's not very good, but I'd be keeping it for ink. And I think I'd rather actually have Cindy in my deck at that point, because I have more Petes than Cindy's. But I think that there is the potential to keep the entire hand. Again, being conservative, I have a game plan. I have 3 ink potentially that I can just fire off, and then I only really need to find 1 ink off of 3 draw steps in a Storm, off an Ursula to Naveen Whole New World. While it's not the most impressive start, it's still a start that doesn't suck. It still has a game plan, and getting to develop a few things, being on the play, and then Whole New World immediately with an upright character. It does feel very different being able to play a Whole New World with a character you've had to shift versus having one that just stays upright. People have kind of overreacted in a lot of ways to having to challenge Daisy in this format, meaning we've seen a lot more rush, a lot more crabs, things that are very good at challenging just to make sure that people don't lose to Daisy. Naveen kind of gets to ignore that by just being upright when you play it. It's wet. He's the wet singer, so he just stays right there and really remains a threat because of his body. 3/3 with 2 lore is nothing to scoff at, and I've often described that card as just a 0-cost 3/3 with 2 lore, and that's really what it is, and Singer 6. So I think as a hedge against all the decks that you see in front of you here, and even potentially against Emerald-based decks, you could keep this hand. I think you would probably ink the Strength first, because it's unlikely you're going to be doing it again, and I'd want to make sure that if I drew a second copy of Strength, that they couldn't take an ink with an Ursula if I still didn't know if they were playing Emerald or not based off their first turn. Usually you'll know based off their first turn what's happening, but in some situations you won't. They could ink something like a Turn-Box Followers and pass. Who knows? It could be Ruby Amethyst or Green Purple at that point, so we'd see. But let's go back again. This was blind on the play. Let's go on the draw, because that changes everything, right? That changes pretty much everything. Going second, I think I'm going to be doing something like this. Debating on the Pete, I think. For ink. I don't mind keeping an Pete for ink. I don't mind keeping most cards for ink. I don't mind Ursula Storm going second. It's not ideal. And it's actually, there's a world where I want to just do this and keep just the 2-drop. I think that's where I'd want to be, in all honesty. I want to find a 1-cost card. I want to find a Lantern. I want to find an Aerial. That's not too much to ask. I can also, in that situation, find additional copies of Storm if I'm so inclined. So that leaves me with 4 Cinderella, 4 Robin Hoods, that's 8, 4 Aerial, that's 12, In this list, only 2 additional storms would be the first through the mulligan hand, so 14 cards, and then 3 more with 3 lanterns. So by mulliganing 6 cards with this hand, I'm looking for 17 additional cards. I'm not mulliganing for a specific one. I don't ever want to do that, but I'm mulliganing for 17 potential cards that are better than these ones. So, or comparable, meaning the storm or storm. So that's why I think this mulligan on the draw is vastly different. Again, I can go from a full keep to mulliganing 6 cards by just being on the play versus the draw. And that's when I think that people still, again, I'm mentioning it now, don't build or play their decks properly enough to be played first or second. This is a huge part of it. So that's just how drastically different play versus draw can be with how you need to make your decisions. I could potentially see full keeping it going first. Going second, I'm keeping 1 card. There you go. That's this game in a nutshell and why it's hard. But yeah, this one's a highlighted one. I'm going to mention that one. And I'm going to say you watch the whole thing here. I know you've been here for a bit. We're coming up on a little over an hour. Appreciate everyone hanging out with me still. But let's just do quickly here. On the draw against Amber Steel, I'm probably going to be doing, interestingly, this. I want to keep this in my deck, I believe. I think that Ursula's pretty good going second, helps you catch back up. And in the instance where the Ursula gets answered, or if it's not really good and you need ink, you can Pete and then Pete Storm. And then you have Naveen if all else fails as well. You could, in some situations, maybe I think if you mulligan the Cinderella, you have to mulligan the Naveen. If you keep the Cinderella, I think you can keep the Naveen. So maybe it's just this, going second against Amber Steel. Going first against Amber Steel, I may be in the full keep hand again. I might go back to just this. To hope it works out and start with Naveen and have some good singers. Pete's pretty strong in that situation as well. I would need to ink both of these and draw an inkable card. But yeah, going second, I think I wouldn't be keeping this, and I think it'd have to be one, either both or neither you could do in that matchup. Let's do Ruby Sapphire. I think we talked about going first. I could potentially see keeping the hand, but knowing the matchup's different than being blind. This matchup, or this hand going going second against blue-red, I probably would just keep the Ursula. That's pretty safe. It's a card to play, and it's not the worst in that situation. It's fine to have again going second. On the play against that deck, I'm also inclined to. I don't have the ability to play, so that's different. So against blue-red going first, the mean isn't as powerful without Lantern, meaning I kind of want to dig a bit for Lantern, meaning I may keep something like this going first. I'm really trying to find Lantern. I need to keep something to be ink. I can also probably keep a strength in that instance too, but the less cards I redraw, the less likely I get what I need. But really just trying to lean into finding a Lantern before, so I can draw a Lantern or a Bare Necessities to make sure they can't quill before I can play Naveen. Either of those 2 cards, I have 5 outs to find it in what's going to be 5 draw steps. So probably should be around that. This is about what I keep going first. And against Ruby Amethyst, green, red, blah, the color pair and the names just always get to me. Sorry about that. Going first against Ruby Amethyst, I'm not thrilled with it. It's functional again. The Ursula is pretty medium. This is a hand again. I could probably keep all going first, or I could mulligan a lot. I think I'd probably actually be inclined to keep and probably scare them a bit, just to have Naveen and reset and be ahead on the board and with singing. So I'd actually full keep against them going first. And going second, I think it'd be drastically different again. I'm almost inclined to. I don't ever really like to full mulligan, but I probably would also just keep the Ursula going second, just as something to potentially do. It's not a very good card against them going second, because unless you can clear everything, which Storm can't, and it's hard to develop 3 characters for strength, because you have to have a 1, 2, and a 3 on turn 3, then they can always just fox you as soon as you do that. So you have to be able to make sure they have no cards in play when you exert your Ursula. So it's a bit tricky. Probably is going to be ink in whatever hand I redraw. But hey, we were on the draw against Ruby Amethyst. That didn't really work out for us, but let's see what we get into. And this hand is a lot better. So yeah, that's my mulligan guide here. So we went through a bunch of different examples. Play versus draw. This hand would play out pretty cool. We'd probably lead on Cinderella, then like Ink Ursula play Cinderella, Ink Tink play Robin Hood, shift Robin Hood, and that's our game plan. There is a different world where you actually just play Robin Hood and then Ursula. I like the ability to threaten this going first. If we were going second, then it's a little bit different. But going first, this hand would be Cinderella versus Ursula. I think going second, you'd go Robin Hood then Ursula. So that's a bit different there. Just to ensure you can sing a Zeus as well, and a Cinderella, so they maybe don't play anything, is the differences. So yeah, but that's been fun for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it there. That's going to be it here for today and for this entry here. We went through a lot of different stuff, a lot of different deck choices, and again, I'm not saying the previous version was incorrect. I'm just saying this is a different take on it. You get to utilize some pretty heavy hitters in Tinkerbell and Grab Your Swords this way. I think give you a bit of an advantage in certain spots. It just also feels like a nice little safety net to be able to recover from a game state. Otherwise, you have to find removal for everything, and that can be a bit taxing, but the deck plays a little more aggressively in the other version, so maybe not as necessary, because ending the game is just as good as killing our opponent's things because they lose. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments. This was a lot. I know I had most of it planned out. The mulligan things are a little bit more on the fly, so bear with me on that. I hope you guys don't mind, because I'm looking at the hand as quickly as you are. I don't really have them kind of pre-selected, which maybe I should do in the future. But till next time, thanks again. Good luck.